we got called in to help with assisting the search of Mr. Reinking.
What was your, as you assisted in the search, what exactly were you doing?
We were given information when the public would call in and have possible sightings of where Mr. Reinking might be, so we would respond to multiple different locations trying to locate the subject.
Okay. Now, as you were attempting to locate the suspects, what exactly were you doing?
They had sent out information and pictures of what Mr. Reinking looked like, and we would just check the areas depending on if it was behind buildings, inside, locations like a Publix, things of that nature, kind of all over the South Nashville area.
How long did you spend in your search on Sunday, April 22nd?
I believe I got in around 1 or 2 p.m. We got called in. I was actually out of town initially, so once I got into town, we stayed until, I know, into dark. I'm not sure the exact time, maybe 10 or 11, and then we were told to come back in the next morning.
And how about on Monday, the 23rd?
I cannot recall the exact time. I want to say it was around 6 a.m., and then we had just started answering those type of calls that were coming in that whole day as well.
What areas were you searching?
The South Nashville, Antioch, and Hermitage area.
At some point in time around, I guess, midday of the 23rd, did you receive any information that the defendant, Travis Reinking, had been located?
We had gotten information or a tip that was saying they believed he had went into a wood line near 5,000 Mountain Springs. At that point, Sergeant Briner, as well as I think it was Detective Greg, responded and made contact with the tipster, who advised that he'd went into the wood line in that area, and so then I responded to basically the opposite side of the wood line.
And once you responded in the wood line, what, if anything, did you learn about what was going on?
I'd actually initially responded to the Old Hickory Boulevard side, and then once I was getting to that area, I heard Detective, now Special Agent Williams, claim or get over the radio stating that he had located the subject inside the wood line, advised us he was just inside the wood line in front of his vehicle on Sprucedale. So at that point, I responded to that side of onto Sprucedale.
And did you enter the wood line?
I did. Once we got to that location, I went up, basically directly up the hill into the wood line from where Detective Williams' vehicle was. At that point, I saw Reinking's prone out on the ground and was actively being handcuffed by other detectives.
What was the weather like at that time?
It had been the day prior raining a lot, and it had been off and on raining the whole time.
Was the ground wet?
Yes.
Where was the defendant, Mr. Reinking, at when you encountered him?
He was still prone out on the ground.
What does prone mean?
Laying face down. At that point, they were already handcuffing him. Normally, we have subjects prone out with their hands out where we can see them, just in case they have any type of weapons or anything on them. But at that point, they were already working into handcuffing him.
You observed the other officers putting his arms behind his back to handcuff him?
Yes.
At any time while you were watching him, did he attempt to pull his arms away?
Not that I observed, but at that point, I'd kind of turned around to try to figure out our exact location, so that I could get more response to the location.
What if anything, did you notice to be in his possession?
At that point, I still observed a black backpack that was on his back.
What happened to the backpack?
Once we got him up off of the ground, or at least set up, we decided to cut off of his backpack since he was already handcuffed and it was around his arms on his back.
Once you cut off the backpack, what happened with it?
They set it down next to him. At that point, command had requested us to check the backpack to see if he had any type of weapons on him. At that point, Sergeant Briner instructed me, since I was not dealing with the subject and had gloves and stuff available in my kit, that I put on gloves and opened up the backpack to check if there was any sort of weapons inside the backpack.
Okay. And did you actually look in the backpack?
I did. So once I opened up the backpack, I observed a silver Kimber 45 caliber that was loaded, and the hammer was pulled back like it was ready to fire.
And Officer Arnett, I'm going to pass up some photos, providing a copy to defense. Would you please look through those and see if they are a fair and accurate depiction of the backpack and its contents as you saw them on April 23rd, 2018?
Yes, they are.
Your Honor, as they be made exhibit number 20. It's a composite exhibit, so it'd be A through G.
A through G?
Yes.
Is this the real G?
It's the real A through G this time, Judge, yes. Officer Arnett, I'm showing you what is 20A. Is this the backpack that was cut off the back of Travis Reinking?
Yes, it is.
And do you see Travis Reinking in the courtroom today?
I do.
Could you please identify him?
He's over there with the defense in a blue button-up.
Okay. And so is that the backpack that you searched through on April 23rd?
It is.
What does 20B show?
It shows a Bible that was in the backpack, as well as a flashlight and a box of ammunition.
What about 20C?
That is the firearm that was inside the backpack.
Did the firearm appear to have a magazine in it when you saw it?
What I recall, yes.
Okay. And I think you stated that the gun was cocked or something like that. What does that mean?
So on this type of firearm, it has a hammer on the back, and it was pulled back.
You can touch the screen and
right here.
And what does that mean?
It's just another level of, so depending on the type of firearm, it has it where it's ready to, when they pull trigger, the hammer will move forward and hit the primer and shoot the gun.
So that gun, if it was loaded, would be ready to fire.
Correct.
Okay, 20D. Is this the same weapon on top of the backpack?
Yes, it is.
And is that a magazine here?
Yes, it appears to be one that would go with that firearm.
All right. And 20E?
That is a holster, a gun, firearm holster, more ammunition, as well as some silver, what I believe to be silver bars.
And I'm going to circle what I believe the holster you're referring to is. Is that correct?
Yes.
What do you see here?
Boxes of ammunition, silver bars.
And would you point to where the silver bars are, or just kind of put a line by them? All right. Now, 20G. What are those?
Water bottles.
And do you know if those items were taken and collected and taken into evidence?
To my knowledge, yes. I stood by with the items until the ID got there to collect the items.
And did he have any thing on his actual person?
I know the other detectives took something off, but I do not know for sure what all items were taken off of his person.
Understood. Officer Arnett, what was the defendant's demeanor as you observed him that day?
He appeared to be compliant, but like I said, I didn't really deal with him that much. I saw that they had taken him into custody and handled, so then at that point I was trying to get our exact location. I went out and asked someone that lived there like what their address was to get more response, and then at that point I stayed with the backpack.
Those are my questions, Your Honor.
Good morning.
Morning.
So just wanted to follow up on a few things that you talked about. You talked a little bit about Mr. Reinking's demeanor. You said you weren't around him for all that long. About how long would you say you were around him total that morning?
I would say approximately around him, 30 minutes or more, but I was not dealing with him directly. I was doing other tasks.
Okay. So around him, so you would say amount of time you may have been actually observing him would have been even less than that 30 minutes, correct?
Correct.
Okay. The backpack, from the pictures, and it appears to be wet through and through. Is that accurate?
I had gloves on. I mean, you could appear that it was wet, but I don't know about through and through. I mean, it was wet, definitely, but it was also had been raining and everything.
But like the cartridge boxes, the Hornady cartridge boxes, specifically on, I think it's Exhibit 20B, they appear to be wet, correct?
Yes, sir.
The firearm itself, Exhibit 20C, it was wet as well. Is that correct?
From that picture, it appeared to be wet, but like I said, it was still inside the backpack. ID is the ones that removed all of the items.
Okay. And so when we talked about earlier, you said, and specifically I think on Exhibit 20C, that the hammer on the firearm was pulled back.
Correct.
And circled it. Did you actually handle the firearm to try to render it safe or take any steps in that direction?
No, I did not.
All right. So these pictures that you looked at, who actually? Well, let me ask it this way: are you the one that actually removed the firearm, sat it down, and snapped these pictures?
No, that would have been ID.
Okay. When you looked in the backpack, did you handle the firearm at all?
I didn't pick it up. I may have moved it out of the way just to see what else was in there, but it was laying and pointed upward.
Okay. So literally you didn't even move it out of the backpack. You looked in, saw that the hammer was cocked back.
Correct.
And just took note of everything in the backpack.
Correct.
You also said there was a holster in the backpack, correct?
Yes.
The firearm was not in the holster, is that correct?
No, it was not.
And I think on the first picture, maybe, or excuse me, 20B, you noted that there was a Bible. Is that right?
Yes.
Thank you.
Redirect? Thank you, officer.
Thank you, Your Honor.
We're getting close to the noon hour, rather than possibly push over into their lunch that's being delivered. We'll go ahead and recess for lunch at this time. Remember, juries, go on back there, relax, and enjoy your lunch. We'll get you back in here between 10 to 1 and 1 o'clock. Please, again, keep in mind, you cannot discuss anything about the trial case. You can talk to yourself and remain open-minded. Anything we need to address before we recess?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you. comes back? They should be ready in a few minutes. They just went outside and get some fresh air, but they're back in the jury deliberation room. Should be ready to go.
You what, Dr. Rice? So,
I didn't get to read it all, but it appears she can reference, did she review everything that you sent?
so she reviewed what the state sent subsequently, and then I think reviewed some of what we had sent to her. I don't think she looked at all of it,
Yeah.
but some.
And bottom line was, she said it didn't affect her opinion at all. She,
I think it just kind of reaffirms where she was.
yeah. Is there anything about that that you want to address specifically?
No.
Well, Judge, just to clarify for the record, Mr. Bruno just said that she reviewed the things that the state sent subsequent. The state sent the items to her at her request in 2018. She chose not to review all of them. They were resent.
On January 15th or whatever it was?
Yes,
Yes.
but it wasn't sent subsequent.
Okay.
We just resent what we originally sent in 2018 at her request.
Okay, I'll accept that clarification, but bottom line is, everything, she's all right with what she's reviewed and can say her opinions based on her expertise and the information she had available. Any issues with that from the state?
No.
And just for the record, Dr. Wood did not
She did not look at
look at
anything
any
that
of it,
was
so
given
whatever
to
her
her.
testimony is gonna be is based on
It-
the information before the information you submitted Monday morning.
Right, to be specific, her opinion is based on things she looked at before she completed her evaluation, and then a long time ago received things after that. And so that's the materials that she's looked at.
But none of that was on the thumb drive.
None of that's on, well, there's a couple of videos that overlap because she had them a long time ago. And I think she sent all of that information to the state and to us after we met with her.
But Your Honor, because her report is from 2018, her testimony has to be about what is in her report from 2018, which is just the diagnosis, not any further opinion.
Right. Well, whatever material she referenced in her 2018 report is admissible. Some of the thumb drive stuff was on what you had for Monday, if I understand you correctly, right?
So on the thumb drive, I want to say it's 2 videos that were on the thumb drive. I think were given to her before
So
she
she had
did the
one.
evaluation, yes. But there were other videos that she didn't have before, she's not looked at,
Yeah.
nor has she looked at the journal.
Right. So her opinion should be based solely on what's in her report
Yes.
that she submitted, that I've reviewed, that y'all submitted to me on last week.
That's the state's position, as well as Your Honor made a comment a second ago about that. Her opinion and what comes in is based on what she reviewed, what's in her report. Therein is the issue of whether that is admissible. The underlying data, 703 issue, so we still have.
Okay. We'll address that this evening.
Yes, when it comes up, as it comes up.
Okay.
But the bottom line is, her position did not change based on that thumb drive and based on the additional.
Yeah, because she didn't really
She
have
didn't
time
have-
to review it.
that's right.
You stopped her before.
Before she looked at any of it,
Okay.
yes.
That's what I'm trying to clarify for the record at this point. They're ready. Yes, we want that.
They got one in the record,
No. Okay.
so we're finished, Stewart second, line up.
Who is your next witness going to be?
Kimberly Brown. The detective, not the doctor.
Sounds about right, so.
Call.
No.
And so not going to go into a whole lot of great detail about your involvement, but when you arrived, were there other officers already there?
There were.
And sort of briefly set the stage of when you arrived, what did you do?
When I arrived, I was briefed by my supervisor, my sergeant. Several patrol officers were already on the scene. They had established a perimeter around the Waffle House. My sergeant had told us what we had going on there. He then directed myself and another detective to go speak with a witness.
Okay, and who was your sergeant at that time?
Trip Sowell.
All right. And was there also a Sergeant Polk there?
He was.
And as time went on, were lieutenants, captains, and above showing up?
Yes, they were.
So, with your duties, and briefly go into this, of interviewing witnesses, did you leave the location to go speak to witnesses at the hospital?
We did.
Right. When you say we, who?
Myself and Detective Summerall.
Okay. Since we expect Detective Summerall to testify, I may not sort of have the jury have to hear it twice. So, but did you and he go to the hospital, Vanderbilt Hospital?
Yes, we did.
And who did you speak to there?
We first spoke with James Shaw.
Okay. And was, pardon me, anyone else at Vanderbilt Hospital that you were able to speak to that early morning?
No, not at that time.
All right. After speaking with Mr. Shaw, did you leave the hospital and go on about other duties?
Correct. We went back to the scene after that.
Okay. And so about what time frame are we talking about now when you were back at the scene?
That's after daylight, so I would say between around 6 or 7 in the morning at that time.
And again, if at some time Detective Summerall and you split up, let me know. But when you say we, is it still you and Detective Summerall?
Yeah, me and Detective Summerall.
Okay, so how long were you at the Waffle House?
We stayed there for a majority of the morning as we were processing this, or our ID units were processing the scene and trying to gather further evidence from the scene.
And did you go to any other location after the processing of the scene?
Not that morning.
All right. Now, on the next day and the days thereafter, did you continue to be involved in this investigation?
I was.
It was one of your duties or responsibilities to obtain DNA swabs.
They were.
Okay, and you referenced Mr. James Shaw and interviewing him that first time, the morning of April the 22nd. Did you obtain a DNA swab from him at that time?
Yes, we had called Mr. Shaw to South Precinct sort of to do a formal interview with him, and we did collect a DNA sample from him at South Precinct.
Okay. Voluntarily,
Correct.
Mr. Shaw's part. All right, I ask if I could have a item passed out. Detective Klarer, you're being handed an item. I'd ask if you could look at the packaging and the information on it and see if you recognize that as being a DNA swab.
It is. I collected the DNA, packaged it, and sealed it, and initialed with the date and my initials on it.
All right, I ask that be the next numbered exhibit. Did you also collect a DNA sample from a person who became known to you as Travis Reinking?
I did.
And is that individual here in the court today? And if so, could you identify him by what he's wearing?
He's seated with defense counsel wearing a blue button-up shirt.
All right, does the record reflect that he has indicated Mr. Reinking? Do you recall when you obtained the DNA sample from Mr. Reinking?
I think it was the day after we got the one from Mr. Shaw. I think it was the 24th. He was incarcerated, and we went to the jail to obtain that DNA sample.
All right, and was that done pursuant to a search warrant issued by a judge of record here in this county?
It was.
All right, ask that be passed up. I say a judge of record, a judge in this county.
Correct.
Okay, you're being handed another item. And does that appear, once you've had a chance to look at it, to be the DNA swab obtained from Mr. Reinking pursuant to the search warrant?
It is. I packaged this, again sealed it with the date and my initials on it.
All right, ask that be the next numbered exhibit. Had you obtained DNA swabs from individuals in the past?
I have.
Is there a pretty common process of obtaining those?
Yes, I think every detective will have their own way, but yes.
Okay. So, when I ask you about obtaining the swabs from Mr. Reinking,
Okay.
you said he was in the jail, basically.
Correct.
For lack of a better term, they all have different names now. But tell us about that. Did you go into where he was housed? Was he brought out?
Yes, we went to the Davidson County Sheriff's Office. We were taken back to not necessarily the cell he was housed in, but what I would call like a supervisory area. And he was brought to us by sheriff's deputies.
Okay. When he was brought there and you saw him, what was his appearance or demeanor?
He was very calm, just as though you would have seen anybody else. There was nothing. He didn't appear to be upset. He was very calm and cooperative.
Okay. And would this have been on the 24th of April?
It was.
You recall approximately what time?
I want to say it was just afternoon, maybe 1 o'clock, 12:30, 1 o'clock.
Explain the process that you use when advising someone that you're going to take their DNA swab.
I just tell them exactly what I'm going to do, that it's a very non-intrusive collection, just to open their mouth. I'm going to take some swabs, such as it's just a elongated Q-tip, and I'm just going to rub it on the inside of their cheeks. And I informed him that I had a search warrant to do so.
Okay. And did you explain that to Mr. Reinking in those?
I did.
Right. Did he make any comment,
He was very, like I said, he was very cooperative. He said, okay. I unpackaged the swabs. He opened his mouth and I swabbed, and that was it. I gave him a copy of the search warrant. He was very cooperative.
It sounds like a procedure that would not have taken very long.
Not long at all, sir.
Those are the only questions I have about this part of the process.
Good afternoon, Detective Klarer.
Hello.
So, the morning you got called in, I guess April 22nd, 2018, you said you went to the hospital and spoke with Mr. James Shaw Jr., is that correct? And you took a statement from him at that time.
I did.
That one was not video or audio recorded.
Correct.
But you did a report of the substance of that statement, correct?
Correct.
And during that interview, you asked him what happened.
Right.
And he gave you his version of what happened, correct?
Correct.
And you asked him to tell you everything he knew at the time.
Yes.
Absolutely. So then you went back on April 25th, 2018, 2018, and you spoke with James Shaw Jr. again at the same time you got his DNA.
Correct.
All right. That one was video and audio recorded, correct?
Yes.
And just like before, you asked Mr. James Shaw Jr. to kind of fully explain and tell you everything that had happened at the Waffle House on the 22nd, correct?
Correct.
And just like you had asked him previously at the hospital, that included anything that Mr. Reinking may have said during the interaction.
Correct.
All right. And isn't it true that, as you stated here, that the statement Mr. James Shaw Jr. gave you on the 25th matched his statement that he gave you on the 22nd?
Right. As far as I recall, yes.
Right. And specifically on the 25th, you recall you asked him multiple times, what did Mr. Reinking say during your interactions with him at the Waffle House?
Yes.
You asked him, what did he say, both inside the Waffle House that you heard and outside the Waffle House that you heard, correct?
Correct.
And isn't it in fact true that during that interview, that on 2 different occasions that Mr. James Shaw Jr. told you that it wasn't anything racial?
I don't remember him saying anything about it being racial.
All right. So if you had the opportunity to review the audio statement, you think that would refresh your recollection?
Yeah. I mean, I don't remember him saying anything that Mr. Reinking said anything about anything being racial.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Okay.
But specifically, do you recall Mr. James Shaw Jr. telling you that Mr. Reinking didn't say anything racial?
That I said he didn't say anything racial?
Do you recall James Shaw Jr. telling you during the interview that Mr. Reinking did not say anything racial?
I don't recall. I don't recall if he said those exact words, but I don't remember him. I thought you were saying, did he say he said something racial? I don't remember him saying that.
Okay. And it would help you to review that portion of the interview to refresh your recollection on
Yeah, I mean, sure.
Okay. Your Honor, can we take a brief recess and allow the witness to refresh his recollection?
Judge, what I'm hearing is the officer is asking, yes.
It's getting close to kind of the mid-afternoon recess anyway, so we're going to go ahead and do that and allow the detective to hear a little bit of this interview to see if it refreshes his memory on anything. Please keep in mind you cannot discuss anything about the trial case. Keep your thoughts to yourself, remain open-minded. We'll get you back in here in about 15 minutes. All right, be seated, please. Did you say you had it queued up, or do you need to get it queued up?
I believe we're ready. What I mean by that is, it worked.
Quiet, please.
So it's plugged in, I think it's coming up on the screen. I don't know what the audio is going to do. I don't know how loud it's going to be when I start. You want to answer anything about it? That's it.
All right.
Okay.
Told us that all you remember was Mark Hustle. Have you remembered anything else? What he might have said, or
No.
what the exact curse words were?
He was just like, let me go, to let the gun go or something like that.
And that's what you were fighting with?
Yeah.
About before that, was he saying anything when he was shooting?
No. I didn't hear anything, but then again, obviously,
Yeah.
I don't know. At that point in time, it's just like, what to do.
Do you remember what he was saying to you?
The words he used.
I know you said he was cussing like, and you were like, why are you cussing me? You're the one doing this.
He was motherfucker or something like that. I don't think it was anything racial.
Yeah.
That I heard. I don't. Then again, I was just trying to get the gun. I completely blind to focus on getting the gun. But I don't think it was anything racial. But he did say like motherfucker and fuck you and like. I know he said fuck you when we were outside. But that's when I thought he had a handgun. 'Cause like I said, I went this way and he went that way. And I was thinking.
Detective, did that refresh your recollection?
It did.
Thank you.
And so, what will be the question when he comes back, just so make sure that he does in fact understand what you're asking?
Yes. So, Detective, During your interview on April 25th, 2018, with James Shaw Jr., did he state to you 2 times that he did not recall Travis Reinking saying anything, or he did not believe Travis Reinking said anything racial?
That's correct.
Okay.
Any issues?
No, Your Honor,
I
that's-
mean, you may have some redirect, I understand that, but as far as this is one issue is concerned, everything's
no, Your
on
Honor,
target.
I
Okay.
believe the foundation was set to ask the
All
question.
right. We'll take about a 10-minute recess. Do you know how long the rest of it will be, we were talking about there in the morning?
Not until we get to the end of today,
Okay.
because we might be able to do more today, so we'll just depend on what we
All right, we'll talk about it now.
get. I would say less than 3.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Detective Klarer, having reviewed the video, has your recollection been refreshed rather?
Yes, I completely misunderstood your question. So,
That's okay. I can ask bad questions sometimes. So now having reviewed that video, isn't it true that during your April 25th, 2018 meeting with James Shaw Jr., that he said on at least 2 occasions in reference to Mr. Reinking's statements the night at the Waffle House, that Mr. Reinking did not say anything racial?
that's correct.
Now, he did go a little further in talking about things that Mr. Reinking did say related to curse words. Is that right?
That's correct.
I think he said that Mr. Reinking actually said, called him an MFer.
Yes,
I'll
correct.
just leave it at the initials, and said some other expletives,
Yes,
but nothing racial.
correct.
All right. Those are my questions. Thank you.
Redirect?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Detective. You may step in. Call your next witness.
Julie Ellis.
You solemnly swear to affirm and tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
Good afternoon. Could you please tell us your name and spell your first and last name for us?
Yes, I'm Julie Ellis, Julieellis.
And by whom are you employed?
I'm employed with the Metro Nashville Police Department's Crime Lab.
And what do you do for the Metropolitan Nashville Police Department Crime Laboratory?
I'm the unit supervisor for the Forensic Biology Unit. Prior to that, I was a Forensic Scientist 3.
And specifically, what do you do? No, you told us the forensic, but what in general do you analyze and test for the police department?
Yes, so basically the Forensic Biology Unit is the DNA unit. So we take evidence from crime scenes and process it for biological fluids called serology testing, and then we forward those samples to DNA testing.
All right, thank you. And I may just generally refer to it as the DNA unit or DNA. Could you tell us briefly what your background and experience has been for you to have the job that you do now?
Yes. I have been with Metro Nashville's Police Department's Crime Lab for almost 7 years. It will be 7 years in March. Prior to that, I worked at a private DNA laboratory called Orchid Cellmark for 10 years as a DNA analyst. After that laboratory closed, I worked at the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation as a forensic technician for about 1.5 years. And then after that job, I worked at LabCorp Clinical Trials as a project specialist.
And over the years, have you examined few or many items of evidence in connection, with DNA analysis?
Many.
All right. Hundreds, thousands, or is...
Thousands.
All right. And what is your educational background?
Yes, I have a Bachelor's of Science in Microbiology from Tennessee Tech University.
And with respect to your reports and results of DNA analysis, have those been presented to courts both in Davidson County and perhaps other states and the South?
Yes, yes, they have.
All right. Your Honor, I would tender Ms. Ellis as an expert in DNA analysis if there's any voir dire.
Any more time?
No, Your Honor, we'll stipulate that she's an expert.
Members of the jury, Ms. Ellis will be declared an expert in the field of forensic science involving DNA analysis. As an expert, she's allowed to give opinions on matters related to this case, whereas most witnesses are only allowed to testify to factual issues. Because of her background and training, she's allowed to give opinions based on the information that's submitted to her. I'll give you a detailed instruction on how you can evaluate expert testimony during the jury trial.
Thank you, Your Honor. Ms. Ellis, 20 years ago, I might have asked a whole lot more questions about DNA, but I suspect now everybody's heard that. But briefly, could you tell us what is DNA and how is it used in the forensic setting, i.e. law enforcement?
Yes, so DNA is basically a blueprint for who we are. It's why some people have brown eyes and some people have blue eyes. You get half of your DNA from your mother and half from your father. Every cell in your body has DNA in it except mature red blood cells, and everyone's DNA is unique except identical twins. How we use it at the crime lab is we obtain DNA profiles from evidence, and then we use known Buccal standards or reference standards from blood to compare those reference standards to the evidence.
And is DNA only used in legal proceedings? What was it initially developed for?
I think it's been used in other areas such as agriculture, medical field, obviously forensics like we're doing right here.
Okay. And approximately how long has DNA been used in the legal setting?
For forensics?
For forensics.
I believe it was first introduced in the mid-90s.
Okay. And over the years, has the DNA analysis advanced, or new techniques, new ways of analyzing substances?
Yes, it has advanced. DNA is always up and coming. I know when I first started, we were only looking at 13 locations on the chromosome, and now we're looking at 24. So it does change.
Mm-hmm. But the science of DNA, the chromosomes, things like that, has that changed?
No, that has not.
Or the basis for the analysis is still the same, is that correct?
Correct. We're still using the same methodologies we have.
Okay. Or if I could ask, to get right to the point, that exhibits 30, 31, 32, 33, and 34 be passed to the witness. set?
Yes.
All right. First of all, could you take a look at those items and see if those are items that you received in the crime lab and conducted examinations upon?
Four of these have been processed by the crime lab, and a fifth one looks like it was not processed by the crime lab, but received by the crime lab.
All right.
All of them have the unique identifier that the crime lab puts on each evidence piece.
Okay. And just for the sake of the record, which was not analyzed? Which exhibit number?
6 DNA swabs from Kimber Handgun.
All right. And does it have the exhibit number on it? I believe that should be
30.
30. Okay. Thank you. So we can set that one aside. Could you tell us what is the process of conducting an analysis, the steps that you go through? And you mentioned a moment ago about a buccal swab. What is that? And how do you spell that just for the...
Buccal, B-U-C-C-A-L. It's from the buccal cells inside your mouth that we use as a reference standard.
And what is that? Why would that be required as far as analysis with respect to being a known sample?
We use known standards to compare against the evidence to include, exclude individuals.
Okay. And are two of those exhibits buccal swabs?
Yes.
And would that be exhibits 33 and 34?
Yes, exhibit 33 and 34.
And what is exhibit 33?
Exhibit 33 are DNA swabs from James Shaw Jr.
And 34?
34 is 4 DNA swabs from Travis Reinking.
And exhibits 30, 31, and 32, would those be swabs collected from items?
Yes,
that- Oh, no, go ahead.
Exhibit 31, 4 DNA swabs, and exhibit 32, 22 DNA swabs from weapons.
Now, when you receive these items into the crime lab to be examined, I'd ask about the steps of analysis. What are those steps?
So when a case gets submitted to the laboratory, it is first received by our evidence receiving unit, who then puts the laboratory unique identifier on each piece of evidence, as I just mentioned. After the investigator sends a submittal form to the laboratory and it's approved, the case then gets assigned by the supervisor to the scientist to work. When the scientist picks up the evidence, then they then do serology testing on it, which is basically looking for biological fluids such as blood or semen on those pieces of evidence, or taking the piece of evidence straight to DNA with a cutting. After a DNA cutting is ready for the processing, there are 4 basic steps of DNA processing. The first one is extraction, so we extract the DNA from the cell. The second one is quantification, and that is where we're measuring the DNA in our sample that we have extracted from the sample. The third step is amplification, and that's where we're amplifying to get many, many copies so that our instruments can read what DNA profile is there. And the fourth step is reporting and interpretation for that case.
Now, when items are submitted for testing, say from a detective, and they have your 282 form, do you have any specific independent knowledge of what the case is about or any of the facts?
Only what the investigator puts on our submittal form, and maybe we have an email here or there to try to figure out more information if we need it for testing.
And which did you receive first, the known swabs or the items for testing?
We received the items of testing.
Okay. And are those kept separate and apart until they are analyzed to see the presence of DNA?
Each sample is tested alone. We cannot have more than one sample open at one time. Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay.
Again, part of the steps of the analysis. And with respect to that, is DNA always present on every item that is submitted?
No, not always.
Okay. And if there is no DNA found, do you make a notation of that?
Yes,
Right.
it's reported. Any evidence that we have to look at, we have to report.
Is there also, on occasion, when you've done the testing, that whatever is recovered may be insufficient for testing?
Yes.
And how does that occur, and what is the threshold
For DNA,
for DNA testing?
like not suitable.
Yes.
Okay, for not suitable, if we're looking for like trace DNA, which is limited contact by an individual to a surface or a material, if we get in a piece of evidence that is saturated with blood stains, we cannot look for trace DNA because the blood body fluid is going to hide or cover up that trace DNA. So that would be not suitable.
Right. And I apologize. As far as the last step being reporting, what gets you to that step as far as the comparison of being able to say whether someone's DNA is or is not on an item?
Yeah, if the DNA's there, we have to report it, and if it's an evidence sample and we have a reference standard, we do have to compare it.
All right. And in this case, did you have reference standards, i.e. James Shaw and Travis Reinking?
Yes.
And were you able to extract DNA from those known samples?
Yes, we did.
And once that is extracted, does that turn into what is called a DNA profile?
Yes.
Right. And was there any difficulty in obtaining that? In other words, was there sufficient buccal swabs and cells to be able to do that?
Correct. We had full profiles from the 2 Buccal standards.
All right. Now, with respect to the evidence that was submitted, could you sort of summarize, looking at your report, of what you received and what you examined?
Yes. Your Honor, may I look at my notes?
You may.
Would you like me to read the list?
Yes, please. And go ahead and ask, were there some extra items that you received that are not included in what I'm asking you about here today?
On our report is everything that we received in our unit. So I don't have anything that wasn't received in our unit on my report.
Okay.
So do you want me to start?
Yes.
Okay, we received lab item 006, which are swabs from firearms, which contain 00601, swabs from AR-15 tip of barrel, 00602, swabs from AR-15 trigger, 00603, swabs from AR-15 stain on right side, 00604, swabs from AR-15 stain on left side, 00605, swabs from AR-15 butt stock, 00606, swabs from CZ rifle, tip of barrel. Item 00607, swabs from CZ rifle trigger. Item 00608, swabs from CZ rifle butt stock. 00609, swabs from Remington, tip of barrel. 00610, swabs from Remington trigger. 00611, swabs from Remington buttstock. That's all item 6.
Okay. And thank you for going through that. And that's where I was going to hopefully stop you. With respect to, you received swabs from different weapons. Is that correct?
Yes.
From what it's indicated here. And you also received swabs from various items of currency.
Currency?
Well, it says swab from, sample 1, sample 2, sample 3, on down.
Oh,
The
under
list.
item lab 11?
Yes.
Okay, swabs from crime scene?
Yes.
Yes. Do you want me to read all those?
No, I was
Okay.
just going to say, because there's a lot.
Yes.
Just to get to that, you received a lot of samples from the crime scene.
Yes.
But honing in on the other items, there was a green jacket submitted, correct?
Correct.
Swabs from that, swabs from magazine, steel magazine, tan magazines.
Correct.
And did you analyze all of those?
We, some items were not examined, but we did bring them into our unit.
All right. And is it your professional decision as to what items to test and what not to test?
For homicides, we have a policy where we test 10 items. Given this was a priority case, we went over the 10 items.
Now, with respect to boiling this down into a nutshell, with respect to comparing Travis Reinking's known sample, known DNA profile, and James Shaw's known DNA profile, were those present on any of these items?
Yes.
Okay. And how do you know that? That's, again, part of the process. So explain that to how you know that in
Yes,
your
so
profession.
we extracted the DNA from the samples and then compared them to the reference standards. So when that comparison was made, if there's a match or consistency with that reference standard, then we report that match.
Right. And were there any matches?
Yes.
Could you tell us that?
Okay. Do you want me to read the paragraph?
Yes.
Okay. Do you want me just to start with the first one on the report?
That's probably a good place to start.
Okay. A presumptive test gave chemical indications of blood on swabs from S1, S2, S6, S9, S10, S14, SC, and SG, which are lab items 11.1, 11.2, 11.6, 11.9, 11.10, 11.14, 11.19, and 11.23. The DNA results obtained from these items demonstrated the presence of a single male contributor. This male DNA profile matches the DNA profile obtained from the Buccal Swab from James Shaw Jr., which is lab item 23. For 22 locations on the chromosome that we tested, the frequency of occurrence of the DNA profile obtained from these items I just mentioned above for unrelated individuals is rarer than 1 out of 100 trillion. The DNA profile obtained from the Buccal Swab from Travis Reinking, item 12, is excluded as the source of the DNA profile from these items. An additional or indication of a possible additional contributor was present on item 1102.
And these would have been items collected at the crime scene.
Yes.
Correct. All right.
Yes.
And so you're saying James Shaw's, be it blood, saliva, whatever, was at the crime scene.
Correct.
All right. And from those swabs from the crime scene, Mr. Reinking's was not there.
Correct, on these items that I just listed.
All right. And just for the sake of reference, why is it given in odds, like 1 out of 100 trillion? What's the purpose of that?
It's how we report our statistics.
Okay. And of the likelihood that it could be some unrelated person's DNA?
The frequency of that profile is rarer than 1 out of 100 trillion, which is greater than the world's population.
Many times over, right?
Yes. Correct.
All right. All right. Now, with respect to the AR-15 rifle and the swabs from it, is that discussed in the second paragraph?
Yes.
And what were your findings with respect to the examination that led to paragraph 2?
Okay. A presumptive test gave chemical indications of blood on one of the swabs from the AR-15 stain on right side, lab item 603. The mixed DNA results obtained from this item demonstrated a presence of 2 contributors. Assuming these 2 interpretable contributors to the mixture, a major and a minor DNA profile were obtained. This major DNA profile matches the DNA profile obtained from the Buccal swabs from James Shaw Jr., item 23. For 22 loci, the frequency of occurrence of the major DNA profile obtained from this item for unrelated individuals is rarer than 1 out of 100 trillion. This partial minor DNA profile is consistent with the DNA profile obtained from the Buccal swab from Travis Reinking, item 12. For 4 loci, the frequency of occurrence of the partial minor DNA profile obtained from item 603 for unrelated individuals is approximately 1 out of 570.
So, would you say it was a match of James Shaw's DNA being on that AR-15 rifle?
a match to the major profile. So when we have two contributors, it means that one contributor shows up more than another. So you have a major and a minor. So we're looking at the major, and his profile matches the major profile.
Okay. And could Mr. Reinking be excluded from also having been in contact with that AR-15 rifle?
No, he was included.
All right. But at a lower odds.
Right. He was consistent with the minor profile.
Okay. And so, without going through a whole lot other of the reports, at this point, paragraphs, if there were a video showing both Mr. James Shaw and Mr. Travis Reinking in possession of that AR-15 rifle, would your results substantiate that?
I believe so.
All right. And were there other items where both Mr. Shaw's DNA and Travis Reinking's DNA were present?
Yes.
And if you could just sort of summarize that.
Like what item number?
Yes, and tell us, yes, what item number and...
Okay. On the the swabs from the AR-15 stain on left side, which is lab item 604, and the swabs from S8, which is lab item 1108, I obtained mixed DNA results from those items, and it demonstrated two contributors. Assuming the two interpretable contributors to the mixture, a major profile was obtained from these items. This major DNA profile matches the DNA profile obtained from the Buccal Swab from James Shaw Jr., item 23. For 22 loci, the frequency of occurrence of the major DNA profile obtained from these items for unrelated individuals is rarer than 1 out of 100 trillion. The DNA profile obtained from the Buccal Swab from Travis Reinking, item 12, is excluded as a source of the major DNA profile obtained from these items. Due to the limited minor DNA data obtained from both of these items, no comparisons will be performed.
All right. And does that in any way indicate that Mr. Reinking was not at some point in contact with that AR-15?
I can't tell you that yet.
Okay. Just from that sample, that swab, his DNA wasn't on it?
Correct.
Okay. And were there any other items where
Yes.
either one or both's DNA were on items submitted to the crime lab?
Yes. A presumptive test failed to give chemical indications of blood on the swabs from the AR-15 buttstock, which is item 605. The mixed DNA results obtained from item 605 demonstrated the presence of two contributors. Assuming two interpretable contributors to the mixture, a partial major DNA profile was obtained from this item. This partial major DNA profile is consistent with the DNA profile obtained from the Buccal Swabs from Travis Reinking, item 12. For 18 loci, the frequency of occurrence of the partial major DNA profile obtained from this item for unrelated individuals is rarer than 1 out of 100 trillion. The DNA profile obtained from the Buccal Swab from James Shaw Jr., item 23, is excluded as the source of the partial major DNA profile obtained from this item. Due to the limited minor DNA data obtained from this item, no comparisons will be performed.
So, does that tell us that the butt, the end of the rifle, had Travis Reinking's DNA on it?
Yes, the two profiles were consistent with each other.
And not James Shaw's, as if he had the rifle?
Correct.
shooting.
He was excluded from this item.
So, James Shaw's is on the part, but not the butt, but the barrel of the rifle. As far as the swabs, the tip, the stain, left side, right side, correct?
Yes, stain left side and right side. I'm not sure where those were located.
Yes. Okay. And the fact that there may have been other partial DNAs or unknown contributors on those items that were submitted, does that have anything to do with whether or not Mr. Reinking and James Shaw's DNA were present?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase
Oh,
that?
I'm just saying, did you determine that there were, I believe you said, unknown minor contributor?
Oh, no
But
comparisons
The
could be made.
comparisons?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
So it was too limited. I was unable to determine if anybody could be included or excluded because it was too limited. There was not enough there.
Okay, and I'm just saying, does that in any way invalidate your findings that James Shaw's DNA, Travis Reinking's DNA was present?
No, because we're looking at the major and the minor, so no comparisons on the minor.
All right. And did you prepare your findings? You've been reading from some paragraphs. Is that from your official written report?
Yes.
If I could tender a copy. Ms. Ellis, could you take a look at that report or that copy and see if that is a copy of your report prepared with respect to the analysis in this case?
Yes.
Or I would tender that as exhibit with her. And I have no other questions, Your Honor.
No questions.
Okay, thank you.
I have a trash can for your coat.
State calls Bridget Chambers. And for the purpose of the clerk, state will be asking to use exhibits 7, 8, 11, 12, and 13. And also exhibit 24.
You solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
And now you'll come around and sit here in this witness chair, and you'll please relate the matter while you testify.
Thank you.
She'll probably need some gloves.
She needs gloves too.
I have some, actually.
Okay. Would you?
Every time I come to court, they're always super big, so I get mine because they fit me.
Good afternoon, Ms. Chambers. Would you please state your name and spell it for the record?
My name is Bridget Chambers. It's BridgetChambers.
And where do you work?
I work for the Metro Nashville Police Department Crime Laboratory in the Firearm and Tool Mark Identification Unit.
What is your, title or position there?
I'm a Forensic Scientist 3, a Forensic Firearms and Tool Mark Examiner.
What is the forensic firearms tool mark and you said identification examiner?
Yes.
Okay.
So my primary duties are to determine whether a bullet or cartridge case was fired in a particular firearm. I also do tool mark examinations, distance determinations, serial number restorations, and our NIBIN database entries and correlations.
Okay. And what is, I guess, how often are you working handling firearms and cartridges and cartridge casings is part of your job?
Generally on a daily basis.
What is your background and training in that field?
I previously, before I worked for the Metro Nashville Police Department Crime Laboratory, I worked for the Indiana State Police Laboratory, and that's where I went through my training program. It's modular in nature. It had to do with firearms history, firearms identification history, manufacturing of firearms and of ammunition. I also did microscopy modules, and then I had to do practicals and tests in each of these modules, and then I had multiple mock cases, and then ended with a mock trial.
And what is your education?
I have a Bachelor of Science in Criminal Justice from Indiana University.
Have you ever had to testify as an expert in the field of forensic firearms and tool mark identification and analysis?
Yes, I have.
At this time, I tender the witness, Ms. Chambers, as an expert in forensic firearms and tool mark identification analysis.
You can stipulate she's an expert.
Should we so declare, and again, Mary Terry, I'll explain expert testimony to you.
All right. Ms. Chambers, what is the process of testing a firearm?
When I receive a firearm, I will open the package that it comes in. I will first check that it's safe. I'll check the chamber, remove any magazines from the firearms, and then I will document that firearm, make, model, serial number, anything on the outside of that firearm that may look odd, and then I will manipulate that firearm to check the action of the firearm. I'll take pictures of the firearm, and then I will take it into our range, and I will test fire the firearm.
Okay. And when you say test fire, what does that mean?
I'll usually load 2 cartridges into a magazine and load it into the firearm and test fire it into a water tank that we have at the laboratory.
And when the firearm is submitted into evidence along with the magazine, do you also test the magazine to see if it will operate with the firearm?
Yes, I do.
And is that common practice in your field?
Yes.
And are you able, is there a process by which you're able to determine whether or not a cartridge can be fired through a specific weapon?
Can you repeat the question,
A
please?
cartridge, sorry. What is a cartridge? When you in your report declare something as a cartridge, what does that mean?
A cartridge is an unfired piece of ammunition, so it's the cartridge case, the powder, and the bullet, and the primer is the ignition system of the cartridge, and that has been unfired.
So what we might commonly understand to be a bullet, is that just the many different pieces that you just described?
Correct. The bullet is the projectile that comes out of the barrel.
Okay. So once a projectile and once a cartridge case is loaded into a firearm and then fired through the firearm, what happens? Can you describe that?
So once the trigger is pulled, that ignition, the primer portion of the cartridge is ignited and then ignites the powder within that cartridge. The energy in the powder from the powder burns, and the energy will push the bullet down the barrel, and then in turn push the cartridge case back. The firearm will cycle, and then the cartridge case is ejected, and then the bullet goes until it hits a target.
And if a cartridge case is found along with a particular firearm that's also found, are you able to conduct a test and analysis to determine if that cartridge case was projected from that particular firearm?
Yes, I can.
And what is the process for doing that?
So when I look at the evidence cartridge cases that I received, I will intercompare those on what's called a comparison microscope, and that's 2 microscopes connected with an optical bridge and one set of eyepieces that lets me look at 2 things at the same time. And so I will evaluate those evidence cartridge cases first to determine the class characteristics that exist, which is the characteristics that are set by the manufacturer. So for cartridge cases, it would be the shape of the firing pin impression and the breech face marks. So once I've established that the class characteristics are similar, then I'll look at the individual characteristics of those cartridge cases. And those are the characteristics that are left during the manufacturing process or through the use and abuse of the particular firearm. So once I've looked at the evidence cartridge cases together, then I will take my test fired cartridge cases that I produced from the firearm, and I'll do the same process over again. I'll look for the class characteristics and the individual characteristics of the firearm, and I'm looking also for the reproducibility of those marks. And once I've completed that, then I will take a evidence cartridge case and compare it to a test fired cartridge case, and through the agreement of class and individual characteristics, I can determine whether that cartridge case was fired in that firearm.
Okay. I'm going to ask you to pick up exhibit number 13. That should be the long box. Now, Ms. Chambers, this has already been admitted into evidence, but are you able to determine whether or not the contents of of exhibit 13 is an item that you tested?
So on the outside of this box, I have my case number, my item number, and my initials, along with my seals have my initials as well. I'm going to. And through the serial number on the firearm, I've determined it is the firearm that I examined.
And what was the process that you were just doing there?
I was checking the firearm to make sure it was cleared and safe.
Okay. And you said this is the firearm that you tested?
Yes.
What item number was that?
My item 003-01.
Okay, and what kind of firearm is it?
This is a Bushmaster XM15-E2S rifle.
And what is the Bushmaster XM15, could that be commonly mistaken for a AR-15?
Yes, it's the same platform as an AR-15.
Some, I guess lay people might commonly refer to it as an assault rifle. Would you, those of you who work in the field of forensic firearms, describe it the same?
No, we don't use that term. We say it's a semi-automatic rifle.
Okay. And you could put Exhibit 13 back. Ms. Chambers, you described it as a semi-automatic rifle. What does that mean?
That's correct. So a semi-automatic rifle requires that the trigger be pulled each time a cartridge has been fired.
And what is the difference between that and a automatic rifle or automatic firearm?
An automatic firearm, one pull of the trigger, you hold the trigger back, and the firearm will continue to fire until you run out of cartridges in the magazine.
In a firearm such as the Bushmaster XM15, which you test fired, how quickly can one fire one round to the next?
As quickly as you can pull the trigger.
So it could be as quick as within seconds you could fire multiple rounds?
Yeah, it's possible. As quickly as you can pull the trigger.
Okay. Were you able to, I want to have you look at Exhibit 11. Can you look at that and tell me if there's anything on the outside of Exhibit 11 that suggests that you tested the items contained within that bag?
Yes, again, it has the case number, item number, and my initials, along with my initials on the seal.
Okay. And is there a description there contained on the bag?
Yes, it's 30 RP223 Remington cartridge casings.
And could you just kind of describe what that means, the Remington RP223?
Yes, so these are Remington brand 223 cartridge cases, so they are fired cartridge cases.
Okay. And what does 223 mean?
That is the caliber of the cartridge case.
And what was the caliber of Exhibit 13, the Bushmaster XM15?
This firearm is chambered for .223 Remington or 5.56 by 45 millimeter cartridges.
Is that round or that particular firearm one that is commonly used by individuals, by the military, or either the U.S. military or other militaries around the world?
Yes, that's generally the 5.56 by 45 millimeter was designed for the military, and then it was adopted by the commercial side, and it was originally the .223 Remington cartridge, but since people were using it interchangeably, now the new firearms they've created, you can use both cartridges for those firearms.
Okay. And did you test the 30 Remington 223 rim cartridge casings that
Yes.
are contained in Exhibit 11?
Yes, I did.
Were you able to conduct an analysis as to whether or not they could match any particular firearm?
Yes, the 30 cartridge cases were identified as having been fired in the Bushmaster rifle.
And that was Exhibit 13, which you showed to us just a few minutes ago.
Yes.
Now I want you to, you can take that, she's done with that. Exhibit number 8, would you please look at that? Now I'd like you to open exhibit number 8, please. And, sorry, before you open it, did you test or examine those particular contents?
No, I did not.
Okay. As a firearms two-mark, forensic firearms and two-mark identification analyst or expert, are you able to look at a particular cartridge case and determine what the caliber is and what it, I guess, the make or manufacturer by looking at it?
Yes.
Okay. Now I'd ask you to open exhibit number 8.
Thank you. Okay.
All right. Do you have any of the cartridge cases in you're able to see any of them, or?
Yes, there are numerous cartridges, unfired cartridges inside this bag.
Would you describe them for, describe at least one of them for me?
Yes, these are Remington brand 223 Remington cartridges.
And are they hollow point or, I guess, full metal jacket?
These ones in my hand, they are hollow point.
What is the difference between a hollow point and a full metal jacket?
So a full metal jacket has no hole at the end. It's completely covered, the bullet is. And the hollow points have a cavity in the nose of the bullet. And the reason for that is if the hollow points, they are intended to expand upon impact, stopping in the target that they are intended for. And then full metal jackets generally go through the target.
And do those cartridges appear to be the same caliber and manufacturer as the cartridge casings that you have already identified, which were in Exhibit 11 as being fired through the Bushmaster XM15, which was Exhibit 13?
They're the same manufacturer and caliber, yes.
Okay. Thank you. No, with that exhibit. Actually, I'm sorry. I'm not done with that exhibit. My apologies. I'd like you to look at exhibit number 7 and 12. Let's start with 7. Are you able to look at the package of exhibit 12 and determine whether or not you tested the contents of that package?
Yes, my case number and item number and initials on the seal.
And
Yes.
what is it contained therein?
This is a magazine for the rifle.
And
the
what is a
Bushmaster.
magazine?
The magazine is what holds the cartridges and loads the cartridges into the firearm.
Okay. were you able to determine whether that particular magazine fit any gun that you tested?
Yes, this magazine was a D&H Industries magazine. It's a manufacturer, and it fits and functions in the Bushmaster rifle.
And how were you able to make that determination?
I loaded cartridges into this magazine and loaded it into the rifle and cycled and fired them, and they functioned as designed.
Okay. And would you look at exhibit number 12?
Oh, that was 12.
Okay. Then exhibit number 7 then.
Okay.
And are you able to determine whether or not you tested the contents of exhibit number 7?
Yes, my markings are on here.
And what's contained in there?
This is 2 Hex Mag magazines.
Is Hex Mag any different than D&H Industries?
It's just a different manufacturer.
What caliber cartridge casing could be held inside of that magazine?
It's marked for 5.56 by 45 millimeter, but it could also hold .223 Remington as well.
And did you conduct a test to make that determination?
Yes, I loaded the cartridges into the magazine and cycled it through the firearm.
Okay. And which firearm are you referring to?
The Bushmaster.
The Bushmaster XM15?
Yes.
Okay. I'd ask you to open that exhibit number 7 so that we can see it. Could you just show the jury and describe kind of how it works?
So here's the 2 magazines. They're the same Hex Mag magazines, and this is what's called the follower, and the cartridges are loaded into the top of this, and both of these can hold up to 31 cartridges, so you can load up to 31 cartridges, load it into the firearm, and with the cycle of the action, it will strip off the top of the cartridge in the magazine, fire, and then the cycling will continue to strip off as you pull the trigger until the magazine is empty.
Now, I'd like you to take back exhibit number 8, please. That was the exhibit that contained the 60 cartridges. And would you show the jury what the process is of loading one of those magazines? You don't have to load it completely, but just if you would put a few of the rounds in there.
So the cartridge fits into the top there, and this is a side-by-side on a staggered magazine here, and it just keep loading cartridges into the top.
Okay. And what you're doing is basically loading them one at a time. Is that correct? All right, thank you. And she no longer needs exhibit number 8, 7, or 12.
Got it done?
Yes, sir.
Long day.
Yes, sir. Long week.
Now, Ms. Chambers, would you look at exhibit number 24? Are you able to determine whether or not the contents of exhibit number 24 contains an item that you tested?
Yes.
And what was the process that you were just doing just then?
I was, again, checking the firearm to make sure it was clear and safe.
Okay, is it clear and safe?
Yes.
And could you just show it to the jury briefly?
So I've checked the chamber here. The magazine has been removed, and there's no cartridge in the chamber.
Okay. And is there also a magazine in Exhibit 24?
Yes, there is.
And would that magazine fit that firearm?
Yes.
And what kind of firearm is it?
This is a Kimber Pro Carry 2 45 auto pistol.
Okay. When you say auto, what do you mean?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
That's the caliber designation 45 auto or 45 ACP. It's just the cartridge that fits in the firearm.
Does that mean it's an automatic firearm or a semi-automatic?
It's a semi-automatic.
So still when you pull the trigger once, only one projectile would come out.
Correct.
Right. Were you able to test that firearm to determine if it was in working condition?
Yes, I was.
And what were you able to determine?
During the examination and test firing of this firearm, it was I documented that it looked like there was some rust within on the barrel and on the rails. So during test firing, when I would load the magazine, a cartridge into the magazine, load the magazine into the firearm, and when I would release the slide, that strips that cartridge off the top of the magazine and loads it into the chamber to be fired. However, when I did that, the slide itself was protruding a little bit, which means it was out of battery. And when a firearm is out of battery, you cannot pull the trigger and fire it. So what I had to do is I just had to tap the back of the slide to get it to close fully, and then I was able to test fire it.
Okay. So it could operate, just not immediately.
In a laboratory setting, correct.
And if an individual was aware of that the firearm would need that tapping in order to get it to work, would they be able to operate the firearm?
Yes.
All right, that is all for exhibit number 24. I do have two more. And Ms. Chambers, you have one box sitting by you. Could you tell me whether or not it has any indications that it's associated with this case?
Yes, it has the case number, item number, and my initials on the box and on my seals.
And does that indicate to you that it's the contents therein is it an item that you tested as part of the investigation?
I can't say that for sure because it looks like my seals have been.
Okay. Did you produce a report there what does the on the outside of the box, does it give any description?
Yes, it says it's a Remington 30-06 with magazine.
Okay.
And then it has, I believe, the serial number. Yes, the serial number.
And did you test the Remington 30-06 with the magazine?
Yes, I did.
And what is the serial number you see on the box?
It is 711-98178, which matches my notes.
Okay. And I'd like to pass up to you a image, which I believe Ms. Chambers, when you look at that image, could you describe it?
Yes, this is a Remington model 710 30-06 rifle.
And is that image consistent with the Remington 30-06 710 rifle that you tested?
Yes.
Okay. Ask that the image be our next exhibit. And permission to publish it to the jury over the screen. Yeah. And that item be marked for identification purposes only, the firearm.
The 30-06
No, the physical contents of the box be marked as a next exhibit for identification.
for ID only.
Yes. So the picture should be 36 and the actual firearm should be 37 for ID at this time.
Got it.
And Ms. Chambers, what are we looking at here?
This is a picture of the Remington 710 30-06 rifle.
And what do those terms mean?
Remington is the manufacturer, the model is 710, and then 30-06 is the caliber and the cartridge designation for this firearm.
Was there a cartridge case, magazine?
Yes,
Also?
there was a magazine.
And how many rounds could that magazine hold?
This magazine could hold 8 cartridges.
8 cartridges.
Yes.
And what type of the manner? If I wanted to fire that weapon, what are the exact steps I would have to take in order to fire it?
So this is a bolt action rifle. There's like a handle on the side that's connected to the bolt, and to load this firearm, you could load the magazine, then manually close that bolt, which would strip that cartridge off the top of the magazine, pull the trigger, and then that action stays closed and the cartridge case is still loaded inside that firearm. So to eject that, you have to manually open that bolt, and then it would eject the cartridge case and then close it again to reload.
Is that different from the Bushmaster XM15?
Yes, the Bushmaster rifle is a semi-automatic, and it's a gas-powered gas impingement type action, which means that the gas from firing the cartridge goes into a tube and then impinges on that bolt, and that the action of the gas onto that bolt will push that bolt back and eject, and then the recoil spring will go back and strip that cartridge and will load without any manual interaction.
And would you be able to fire the Bushmaster XM15 more rapidly than this bolt action Remington 1730-06?
Well, you would not have to have any manual activity to load or unload the firearm for the Bushmaster as you would for this rifle.
Okay. And could you just circle for us where the actual bolt action portion is?
Doesn't that one? Okay.
Is it not working?
No.
You try.
Oh, there we go.
Okay. All right. And what is? Okay. Thank you. And now I'm gonna circle some. What is this here?
That is a scope, a microscope, or not microscope, a scope to usually used for hunting to see what you're hunting.
Okay. And what is this right here?
That is the bipod. It's a stand. You can fold that down and lay it on the ground or on the table, and it's a stand for the rifle.
Is much like a sniper rifle?
It's just a stand to either set on the ground or to set on a table.
Okay, understood. Now I'm gonna move on to the next box, and we can take this image down. Yes, I'm done with that box. I will have another image though, shortly. I'm sorry, Ms. Chambers, in case I didn't ask, was the firearm, which is now Exhibit 37 for identification purposes only, was that in normal operating condition?
Yes, it was.
Okay. And how about the Bushmaster XM15, which was Exhibit 13?
Yes, it was a normal operation.
Okay. All right, so now will you look at the box that is to your right and tell us whether or not you are able to determine if the contents contained therein were tested by you?
The package does have my markings on the seals and on the box.
Okay. And are you able to, is there a description on the box?
Yes, it says it's a CZ 452-2E ZKM. And the serial number is 825386, which matches my notes.
Okay. So you tested a CZ452-2E ZKM rifle with serial number 825386.
Yes.
Okay. And you have an image in your hands. Is that image consistent with the firearm which I just read off, the CZ rifle that you tested?
Yes.
Okay. I'd ask that the image be Exhibit 38 and that the actual firearm be Exhibit 39 for identification purposes only, and permission to publish Exhibit 38 at this time. And we're going to put it back up on the screen also. Yes, we're done. Ms. Chambers, what are we looking at here?
This is a picture of the CZ rifle.
What is the caliber of this rifle?
This is a 22 long rifle.
Okay. And how many cartridge cases will it hold?
The magazine will hold 5 cartridges.
Okay, and will you just circle the magazine for me?
I'm sorry?
Circle the magazine for me?
Yes.
All right. Did you test fire this firearm?
Yes, I did.
And was it in normal operating function?
Yes, it was.
And what is this right here that I'm circling?
It is a scope for this rifle.
Okay. To your knowledge, what is this rifle normally used for?
This can also be a hunting rifle, usually for smaller game.
Smaller game such as?
Like squirrels and birds and things like that.
Okay, understood. Oh, yes. Is this firearm a bolt action firearm also?
Yes, it is.
So what you discussed about the process of having to do each time, that's what you have to do with this firearm in order to make it fire?
Yes, this firearm is also manually loaded and unloaded.
Right. Anything else? All right. Those are my questions, young man.
Good evening, Ms. Chambers.
Good evening.
So just a few questions. I want to direct your attention back to this, the 45 Kimber Pro Carry 2. I want to make sure I understand you, because based on what you were telling me and the jury, when you first attempted to examine this firearm, it was not in normal operating condition, correct?
Well, in the laboratory setting during my test firing, when I attempted to load a cartridge into the chamber via the magazine and closing the slide would not close by itself. I would have to press on the back of the slide to get it fully closed into battery.
And that's not how the manufacturer intended at Kimber for that firearm to function, correct?
Correct.
So it was not in normal operating condition when you found it and test fired it or attempted to test fire it in the laboratory?
Correct.
Thank you.
Sorry. Just one redirect question. Mr. Evans was asking about on the 45 Kimber, it being out of battery. We kind of talked about that. Did you put that in your report?
Yes, I did.
Okay. At this time, I'd ask to pass up the report.
Just for clarification, is this report solely for that one weapon, or is this?
No, it's for all of her. Or I guess maybe she should answer the question, Judge.
I don't mind if he puts it in late. It's okay.
know. Sometimes they have an individual report for each weapon.
And Ms. Chambers, you just looked at a document. Is that the report that you created in response to the testing that you did and testified about here today?
Yes, it is.
And I'd ask that it be made exhibit number 40. And no further questions.
Anything else?
No, Your Honor.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Step down.
Thank you.
Argument?